describing is like a very rich historical account of really Keynes' liquidity preference. And first of all, the big question I have is, how would you map this onto some kind of, like, as someone who does both history and economics,
Right.
I really sympathize with how bad this question is. Like, how would you map this onto a kind of exposition of the liquidity preference and how it changes through time? And does a shift to mass consumption at all increase the multiplier effect of the liquidity preference? I wonder, like, as we go forward, like, do you see something like that happening? I think it's
yeah.
Beautiful, you know?
Gosh. So, I mean, to me, that's. I don't want. I think right. The situation ultimately, this sort of dependence on cash is the classic liquidity trap that Keynes is describing. I think, to me though, I would sort of move beyond it and ask about the sort of one sense of the fundamentals of the economy, and I'm not sure I know how to answer that. There's the investor's answer, right, and then there's the answer about what I'm almost agnostic in a way about the sort of the deeper economic questions. I was trained. My background was a Marxist background, not, and I'd always been unhappy with the kind of Keynesian formulation. I'm at this point agnostic about most of the things that I don't believe in the labor theory of value anymore. I don't believe that in the inevitability of the falling rate of profit. I do not believe that but my sense of this, of describing this world, is to move away from just the question of liquidity and towards the question of commodity chains and that broader economy that's being described, that cannot be described with the metrics that Keynes uses, I think. And that's the mistake of Keynes, I think, is to give us a collection of things that look like the real economy but aren't the real economy, like GDP, GNP, and those sorts. NBER is in this situation where they're constantly expanding. I tried to work out the formula, the NBER's current formula for upturns and downturns. There's 100 variables. It's incredibly, it's a shockingly how sort of complex it is. I'm just so I think GNP and GDP. I think that the sort of Keynes's formula for when the economy is recovered and when the economy is in good shape is not, from a 19th century perspective, which is I'm always putting on the sort of 19th century goggles, is not unfortunately, it's too incomplete a picture of the whole economy. So that's my simple answer, is that I'm really unhappy with Keynes's account of this, and I'm especially unhappy with the way that economic historians have taken GDP and GNP and kind of dropped it back into the past, created all these sort of calculations. So I think I'd hesitate to use Keynes's analysis, because I think ultimately liquidity is not enough. It's not sufficient for accounting for what establishes in the economy. There's another. This may be too complicated. You think about that transatlantic. Oh, good. Okay. Capital account and current account and all these other things about international trade. It's not really an answer to the question, but it's in a way I want to talk about a little bit of my problem with the way in which Keynes frames international economics. We've got the commodities flowing from west to east and the commodities flowing from east to west from 1793, well, from 1607 until 1911. There's always more that's flowing from east to west than there is flowing from west to east. The U.S. cannot export enough to answer all of the things that it's importing. That differential is often called, the capital account, or the sort of current account. The way in which the U.S. has to respond to that is by issuing bonds. Initially, that's stocks and bonds in the first and then the second Bank of the United States. Then it's these participation in the sterling bills of exchange. Then it's finally settled with bankers' acceptances after 1911, and that's to me that commodity chain has to be at the center of any explanation of the economy, because the bonds, the promise to pay over a stretched period, 4 or 5 years, is ultimately what's making the whole international economy kind of work. And when there's a problem with those instruments that provide that thing, that's where the sort of mistake or the problem is. And so again, I don't know if that's a good answer to your question or not, but it's my other problem with Keynes, I suppose.
If I have asked a theoretical follow-up on that, I think that might assume, first of all, that assumes kind of a very Hicksian reading of Keynes.
Okay,
it's not really the only Keynes.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
But the other problem with that is it almost then assumes that the system is stable if it's left untouched, except all these political events. You're I feel like if situating like that might risk you falling into the trap rather than, I don't know, accepting Keynes I read as someone who's a theorist of instability, of non-equilibrium economies. And viewing liquidity like that could give you more of an internalized way of thinking about it rather than having falling into almost like Austrian understanding where these things are perfect until there's some kind of swamp act or something.
Right. No, and that's the 1857 is clearly a case where state intervention does bring about these things. But mine is not. You're right. I am buying into a sort of there is a kind of equilibrium model in here. For me, most of those transformations, though, that take place are not generally by state actors. 1893 has everything to do with sugar, the biggest U.S. import. Get 40% of U.S. Tariff income comes from sugar in the 1890s, and so you're right. There is an equilibrium model, a version of an equilibrium model here, but it's not one, I think, in which the state is always the bad guy, and always. There's also the problem, the central problem of leverage. The leverage makes possible the weakness that ultimately provides some problem that will burst them. Is leverage, yeah.